Hello and welcome to another episode of Reading the Weird. This is part 5 of our reading of The Case of Charles Dexter by H.P. Lovecraft. It's a very long one, it's a novella that we're plowing through here, so I'm going to go straight back into it. Part 3. A Search and an E Vocation. Subsection 1. Charles Ward, as we have seen, first learnt in 1918 of his descent from Joseph Curwen. That he at once took an intense interest in everything pertaining to the bygone mystery is not to be wondered at, for every vague rumour that he had heard of Curwen now became something vital to himself, in whom flowed Curwen's blood. No spirited and imaginative genealogist could have done otherwise than begin forthwith an avid and systematic collection of Curwen data. In his first delvings there was not the slightest attempt at secrecy, so that even Dr. Lyman hesitates to date the youth's madness from any period before the close of 1919. He talked freely with his family, though his mother was not particularly pleased to own an ancestor like Curwen, and with the officials of the various museums and libraries he visited. In applying to private families for records thought to be in their possession, he made no concealment of his object, and shared the somewhat amused scepticism with which the accounts of the old diarists and letter-writers were regarded. He often expressed a keen wonder as to what really had taken place a century and a half before at the Pawtuxet farmhouse, whose site he vainly tried to find, and what Joseph Curwen really had been. When he came across the Smith Diary and Archives and encountered the letter from Jedediah Orne, he decided to visit Salem, and look up Curwen's early activities and connections there, which he did during the Easter vacation of 1919. At the Essex Institute, which was well known to him from former sojourns in the glamorous old town of crumbling Puritan gables and clustered gambrel reefs, he was very kindly received, and unearthed there a considerable amount of Curwen data. He found that his ancestor was born in Salem village, now Danvers, 7 miles from town, on the 18th of February, 1662-63, and that he had run away to sea at the age of 15, not appearing again for 9 years, when he returned with the speech, dress, and manners of a native Englishman, and settled in Salem proper. At that time he had little to do with his family, but spent most of his hours with the curious books he had brought from Europe, and the strange chemicals which came for him on ships from England, France, and Holland. Certain trips of his into the country were the objects of much local inquisitiveness, and were whisperingly associated with vague rumours of fires on the hills at night. Curwen's only close friends had been one Edward Hutchinson of Salem village, and one Simon Orne of Salem. With these men he was often seen in conference about the common, and visits among them were by no means infrequent. Hutchinson had a house well out toward the woods, and it was not altogether liked by sensitive people because of the sounds heard there at night. He was said to entertain strange visitors, and the lights seen from his windows were not always of the same colour. The knowledge he displayed concerning long-dead persons and long-forgotten events was considered distinctly unwholesome, and he disappeared about the time the witchcraft panic began, never to be heard from again. At that time Joseph Curwen also departed, but his settlement in Providence was soon learned of. Simon Orne lived in Salem until 1720, when his failure to grow visibly old began to excite attention. He thereafter disappeared, though 30 years later his precise counterpart and self-styled son turned up to claim his property. The claim was allowed on the strength of documents in Simon Orne's known hand, and Jedediah Orne continued to dwell in Salem till 1771. When certain letters from Providence citizens to the Reverend Thomas Burnand and others brought about his quiet removal to parts unknown. Certain documents by and about all of these strange characters were available at the Essex Institute, the courthouse, and the Registry of Deeds, and included both harmless commonplaces such as land titles and bills of sale, and furtive fragments of a more provocative nature. There were 4 or 5 unmistakable allusions to them on the witchcraft trial records, as when one Hepzibah Lawson swore on 10th of July 1692 at the Old Court of Oyer and Termina under Judge Hawthorne that 40 witches and the black man were wont to meet in the woods behind Mr. Hutchinson's house. and one Amity Howe declared at the session of the 8th of August before Judge Gedney that Mr. G.B., Reverend George Burroughs, on that night put the devil his mark upon Bridget S., Jonathan A., Simon O., Deliverance W., Joseph C., Susan P., Martable C., and Deborah B. There was a catalogue of Hutchinson's uncanny library as found after his disappearance, and an unfinished manuscript in his handwriting, couched in a cipher none could read. Ward had a photostatic copy of this manuscript made, and began to work casually on the cipher as soon as it was delivered to him. After the following August, his labours on the cipher became intense and feverish, and there is reason to believe from his speech and conduct that he hit upon the key before October or November. He never stated, though, whether or not he had succeeded. But of the greatest immediate interest was the Orne material. It took Ward only a short time to prove from identity of penmanship a thing he had already considered established from the text of the letter to Curwen, namely, that Simon Orne and his supposed son were one and the same person. As Orne had said to his correspondent, it was hardly safe to live too long in Salem, hence he resorted to a 30-year sojourn abroad, and did not return to claim his lands except as a representative of a new generation. Orne had apparently been careful to destroy most of his correspondence, but the citizens who took action in 1771 found and preserved a few letters and papers which excited their wonder. There were cryptic formulae and diagrams in his and other hands, which Ward now either copied with care or had photographed, and one extremely mysterious letter in a chirography that the searcher recognized from items in the Registry of Deeds as positively Joseph Curwen's. This Curwen letter, though undated as to the year, was evidently not the one in answer to which Orne had written the confiscated missive, and from internal evidence Ward placed it not much later than 1750. It may not be amiss to give the text in full, as a sample of the style of one whose history was so dark and terrible. The recipient is addressed as Simon, but a line, whether drawn by Curwen or Orne, Ward could not tell, is run through the word. Providence, 1st of May. Brother, my honoured ancient friend, due respects and earnest wishes to him whom we serve for your eternal power. I am just come upon that which you ought to know, concerning the matter of the last extremity, and what to do regarding it. I am not disposed to follow you in going away on account of my years, for Providence has not the sharpness of the bay, of hunting out uncommon things and bringing to trial. I am tied up in ships and goods, and could not do as you did. Besides the which, my farm at Pawtuxet have under it what you know, and would not wait for my coming back as another. But I am not unready for hard fortunes, as I had told you, and have long worked upon the way of getting back after the last. I last night struck on the words that bring up Yog Sothoth, and saw for the first time that face spoken of by Ibn Sabachor in the blank. And it said that the 3rd Psalm in the Liber Damnatus holds the Claucle, with sun in the house, Saturn in trine, draw the pentagram of fire, and say the 9th verse thrice. This verse repeat each Rhodmus and Hollow's Eve, and the thing will breed in the outside spheres. And of the seed of old shall one be born, who shall look back, though knowing not what he seeks. Yet will this avail nothing if there be no air, and if the salts or the way to make the salts be not ready for his hand. And here I will own I have not taken needed steps, nor found much. The process is plainly hard to come near, and it uses up such a store of specimens, I am hard put to it to get enough. Notwithstanding the sailors I have from the Indies, the people about are becoming curious, but I can stand them off. The gentry are worse than the populace, being more circumstantial in their acts, and more believed in what they tell. That Parson and Mr. Merritt have talked some, I am fearful, but no thing so far is dangerous. The chemical substances are easy of getting, there being two good chemists in town, Dr. Bowen and Sam Carew. I am following out what Borellus said, and have help in Abdul al-Hazred and his 7th book. Whatever I get, you shall have. And in the meanwhile, do not neglect to make use of the words I have here given. I have them right, but if you desire to see him, employ the writings on the piece of blank that I am putting in this packet. Say ye verses, every Roodmas and Hallows Eve, and if the line run out not, one shall be in years to come that shall look back and use what salts or stuff for salts you shall leave him. Job 14:14. I rejoice you are again in Salem, and hope I may see you not long hence. I have a good stallion, and am thinking of getting a coach, there being one, Mr. Merritt's, in Providence already, though the roads are bad. If you are disposed to travel, do not pass me by. From Boston take the post road through Dedham, Wrentham, and Attleborough, good taverns being at all these towns. Stop at Mr. Balcom's in Wrentham, where the beds are finer than Mr. Hatcher's, but eat at the other house, for their cook is better. Turn into Providence by Pawtuxet Falls, and the road past Mr. Sale's tavern. My house is opposite Mr. Epenetus Olney's tavern, off the town street. First on the north side of Olney's Court. Distance from Boston Stone about 44 miles. Sir, I am your old and true friend and servant in Almusin, Metroton. Joseph C. To Mr. Simon Orne, Williams Lane, in Salem. This letter, oddly enough, was what first gave Ward the exact location of Curwen's Providence home, for none of the records encountered up to that time had been at all specific. The discovery was doubly striking because it indicated as the newer Curwen house built in 1761 on the site of the old, a dilapidated building still standing in Olney Court, and well known to Ward in his antiquarian rambles over Stampers Hill. The place was indeed only a few squares from his own home on the great hill's higher ground, and was now the abode of a Negro family much esteemed for occasional washing, house-cleaning, and furnace-tending services. To find in distant Salem sudden proof of the significance of this familiar rookery in his own family history was a highly impressive thing to Ward, and he resolved to explore the place immediately upon his return. The more mystical phases of the letter, which he took to be some extravagant kind of symbolism, frankly baffled him, though he noted with a thrill of curiosity that the biblical passage referred to, Job 14:14, was the familiar verse, "If a man die, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait, till my change come." Subchapter 2. Young Ward came home in a state of pleasant excitement, and spent the following Saturday in a long and exhaustive study of the house in Olney Court. The place, now crumbling with age, had never been a mansion, but was a modest 2.5-story wooden townhouse of the familiar Providence colonial type, with plain peaked roof, large central chimney, and artistically carved doorway with rayed fanlight, triangular pediment, and trim Doric pilasters. It had suffered but little alteration externally, and Ward felt he was gazing on something very close to the sinister matters of his quest. The present Negro inhabitants were known to him, and he was very courteously shown about the interior by old Asa and his stout wife Hannah. Here there was more change than the outside indicated, and Ward saw with regret that fully half of the fine scroll and urn over-mantels and shell-carved cupboard linings were gone, whilst much of the fine wainscoting and Bolection moulding was marked, hacked, and gouged, or covered up altogether with cheap wallpaper. In general, the survey did not yield as much as Ward had somehow expected, but it was at least exciting to stand within the ancestral walls which had housed such a man of horror as Joseph Curwen. He saw with a thrill that a monogram had been very carefully effaced from the ancient brass knocker. From then until after the close of school, Ward spent his time on the photostatic copy of the Hutchinson cipher and the accumulation of local Curwen data. The former still proved unyielding, but of the latter he obtained so much and so many clues to similar data elsewhere that he was ready by July to make a trip to New London and New York to consult old letters whose presence in those places was indicated. This trip was very fruitful, for it brought him the Fenner letters with their terrible description of the Pawtuxet farmhouse raid, and the Nightingale Talbot letters, in which he learned of the portrait painted on a panel of the Kirwan Library. This matter of the portrait interested him particularly, since he would have given much to know just what Joseph Kirwan looked like, and he decided to make a second search of the house in Olney Court to see if there might not be some trace of the ancient features beneath peeling coats of later paint or layers of mouldy wallpaper. Early in August that search took place, and Ward went carefully over the walls of every room sizable enough to have been by any possibility the library of the evil builder. He paid special attention to the large panels of such overmantels as still remained, and was keenly excited after about an hour, when on a broad area above the fireplace in the spacious ground-floor room, he became certain that the surface, brought out by the peeling of several coats of paint, was sensibly darker than any ordinary interior paint or the wood beneath it was likely to have been. A few more careful tests with a thin knife, and he knew that he had come upon an oil portrait of great extent. With truly scholarly restraint, the youth did not risk the damage which an immediate attempt to uncover the hidden picture with a knife might have done, but just retired from the scene of his discovery to enlist expert help. In 3 days he returned with an artist of long experience, Mr. Walter C. Dwight, whose studio is near the foot of College Hill, and that accomplished restorer of paintings set to work at once with proper methods and chemical substances. Old Asa and his wife were duly excited over their strange visitors, and were properly reimbursed for this invasion of their domestic hearth. As day by day the work of restoration progressed, Charles Ward looked on with growing interest at the lines and shades gradually unveiled after their long oblivion. Dwight had begun at the bottom, hence, since the picture was a 3/4 length one, the face did not come out for some time. It was meanwhile seen that the subject was a spare, well-shaped man with dark blue coat, embroidered waistcoat, black satin small-clothes, and white silk stockings, seated in a carved chair against the background of a window with wharves and ships beyond. When the head came out, it was observed to bear a neat Albemarle wig, and to possess a thin, calm, undistinguished face, which seemed somehow familiar to both Ward and the artist. Only at the very last, though, did the restorer and his client begin to gasp with astonishment at the details of that lean, pallid visage, and to recognise with a touch of awe the dramatic trick which heredity had played, for it took the final bath of oil and the final stroke of the delicate scraper to bring out fully the expression which centuries had hidden, and to confront the bewildered Charles Dexter Ward, dweller in the past, with his own living features in the countenance of his horrible great-great-great-grandfather. Ward brought his parents to see the marvel he had uncovered, and his father at once determined to purchase the picture despite its execution on stationary panelling. The resemblance to the boy, despite an appearance of rather greater age, was marvellous, and it could be seen that through some trick of atavism the physical contours of Joseph Kirwan had found precise duplication after a century and a half. Mrs. Ward's resemblance to her ancestor was not at all marked, though she could recall relatives who had some of the facial characteristics shared by her son and by the bygone Kirwan. She did not relish the discovery, and told her husband that he had better burn the picture instead of bringing it home. There was, she averred, something unwholesome about it, not only intrinsically, but in its very resemblance to Charles. Mr. Ward, however, was a practical man of power in affairs, a cotton manufacturer with extensive mills at Riverport in the Patuxent Valley, and not one to listen to feminine scruples. The picture impressed him mightily with its likeness to his son, and he believed the boy deserved it as a present. In this opinion, it is needless to say, Charles most heartily concurred, and a few days later Mr. Ward located the owner of the house, a small rodent-featured person with a guttural accent, and obtained the whole mantle and overmantle bearing the picture at a curtly fixed price, which cut short the impending torrent of unctuous haggling. It now remained to take off the panelling and remove it to the Ward home, where provisions were made through the restoration and installation with an electric mock fireplace in Charles's third-floor study or library. To Charles was left the task of superintending this removal, and on the 28th of August he accompanied 2 expert workmen from the Crooker decorating firm to the house in Olney Court, where the mantle and portrait-bearing overmantle were detached with great care and precision for transportation in the company's motor truck. There was left a space of exposed brickwork making the chimneys coarse, and in this young Ward observed a cubical recess about a foot square, which must have lain directly behind the head of the portrait. Curious as to what such a space might mean or contain, the youth approached and looked within, finding beneath the deep coatings of dust and soot some loose yellowed papers, a thick, crude copybook, and a few mouldering textile shreds which may have formed the ribbon binding the rest together. Blowing away the bulk of the dirt and cinders, he took up the book and looked at the bold inscription on its cover. It was in a hand which he had learned to recognise at the Essex Institute, and proclaimed the volume as the Journal and Notes of Joseph Curwen, Gentleman of Providence Plantations, late of Salem. Excited beyond measure by his discovery, Ward showed the book to the two curious workmen beside him. Their testimony is absolute as to the nature and genuineness of the finding, and Dr. Willett relies on them to help establish his theory that the youth was not mad when he began his major eccentricities. All the other papers were likewise in Curwen's handwriting, and one of them seemed especially portentous because of its inscription, "To him who shall come after, and how he may get beyond time and the spheres." Another was in a cipher, the same, Ward hoped, as the Hutchinson cipher, which had hitherto baffled him. The third, and here the searcher rejoiced, seemed to be a key to the cipher, while the fifth and fifth were addressed respectively to Edward Hutchinson, armiger, and Jedediah Orne, Esquire, or their heir or heirs, or to those representing them. The sixth and last was inscribed, "Joseph Curwen, his life and travels between the years 1678 and 1687, of whither he voyaged, where he stayed, whom he saw, and what he learned." And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you did like this, and if you did, remember to click the like button. Share this with your friends so that they can hear a good book too, and do remember to subscribe for future videos, because then you'll get the next part as it comes out. Next time we'll be looking at sub-chapter 3 and going on further with the case of Charles Dexter Ward by H.P. Lovecraft. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.